Chenrezig is considered to be, as I have just stated, the bodhisattva of compassion. He is usually, but not always, in that all of the Buddhas and Bodhisattvas that we practice have many different forms according to the particular cycle of revelation that we are practicing within the context of. But a very common form of Chenrezig is that he is seated in a full lotus position on a lotus throne and a moon seat, and that is a cushion which is luminous and has the same qualities as the moon, in that it is luminous and pure and radiant, and has the same inner qualities that are also depicted by the moon's qualities, and I perhaps will have time to go into that later. He's seated in a full lotus posture, and he has generally, and again this is the most common form, 4 arms and 1 face. 2 of the arms are in an outward position like that, and in one arm, the right hand, Chenrezig has a crystal mala. A mala is a string of beads, generally 108 of them, and they are used to count one's prayers, and this mala that he is holding is made of crystal. And in the other hand, he is holding a lotus flower. And he has 2 central hands, and these 2 central hands come together in front of the heart, and in the central hands he is holding what is called a norbu, or a wish-fulfilling jewel. This posture is important in that whenever one generates oneself as a deity, or practices a deity as we say it, one actually considers oneself to have transformed, or to know oneself, or to perceive oneself as being this pure deity form, in that one's mind arises just as we arise from birth in a form that sentient beings experience. One arises in one's practice as a pure deity form, and one has the qualities that are indicated by that form. Generally speaking, these indications are shown through the color, through the posture, through the implements that are held in the deity's hand. And one considers that one actually arises in this pure deity form. So it is important to understand what the different implements are, and how they are postured, and what each one of them might mean. So keep in mind then that he has the 4 arms, and that 2 of them are holding the crystal mala and the lotus, and the other 2 are holding the precious wish-fulfilling jewel, and we'll go into explaining that with some depth. Then also you should consider that Chenrezig has 1 face. Many of the deities that are practiced have more than 1 head. Very often there are 3, and there are forms of Chenrezig that have many heads. But in this case, Chenrezig has 1 head, and the face is peaceful and smiling and has an expression of loving kindness. He wears a crown, which is called the 5 Dhyana Buddha crown, and that is considered to be many things. On an external level, it is considered that he holds the empowerment and displays all of the qualities of the 5 Buddhas and of all the 5 Buddha families. And perhaps on a deeper level, we consider that the 5 senses are purified, all of the qualities associated with ordinary consciousness are purified, and one's perception is totally purified. Overall, Chenrezig's attitude is one of loving kindness and peacefulness. He has within his heart a lotus and moon seat, just like the one that he is sitting on, and on the lotus and moon seat is the seed syllable Hri, and around the seed syllable Hri is his mantra, which is Om Mani Padme Hum. It is considered that the mantra circles clockwise, and that rays of loving kindness and compassion, rays of light, rays of uncountable and infinite benefit extend to all sentient beings from the encircling mantra and the seed syllable. And that in the three places of the forehead, the throat, and the heart are the seed syllables Om, Ah, Hung. And that these, while the Hri is considered to be in the on the heart itself and encircling around, and the mantra encircling around the heart in a very deep way, the Hung is considered to be emblazoned in the heart area in writing that is as thin as a hair's breadth, and is considered to be more external, as are the Ah and the Om. These are an indication of the purification, the total purification of all karma and activity associated with body, speech, and mind. So these are some of the qualities of Chenrezig. One of the qualities that I would like to speak of with some emphasis is the holding of the wish-fulfilling jewel. When ordinary sentient beings think of a wish-fulfilling jewel, we think not so differently than we did when we were children. And if you remember, when you were a child, you wished that you had some kind of superpowers. Perhaps we had dreams of flying. Even adults have dreams of flying. I know when I was a little girl, I used to pretend that I had a magic wand, and I used to try to make one out of beautiful things, and often thought that I had succeeded, but as I think now of the things that I made them out of, they must have looked extremely tacky. I remember rolling a piece of stick in glitter, in glue and glitter, trying to make a magic wand that way. And I also remember using one of those aluminum foil cardboard rollers that you find at the center of a roll of aluminum foil, and coloring it with colors, and then putting 2 light bulbs on either end and dipping them in glitter, trying to get it to look really magical, and was completely dismayed to think that I missed by just a few years. Well, actually I'm 39, so I guess I missed it by more than a few years. The event of many toy companies coming out with already glittered magic wands with fluid in the middle, and the glitter comes up and down and it moves around, and at the end there are these long streamers with colored stuff, and it really looks like you're going to get zapped if you get hit with one of these things. And they have electric ones, and so I judge from that, at least, that many other children have the same idea as me, that it would be wonderful to have such a thing, that, you know, upon using it one could have any wish, anything that one desired. And I've watched my sons grow up, and as my sons grew up, they, of course they're grown up now, but as they grew up, they used to want to have superpowers, and they had all these superheroes, especially my older son. He had them all. He used to write down categories of superheroes, the ones that had mental powers, the ones that had physical powers, the ones that had specific kinds of gadgets that they could use in ways, and ones that were very muscular. Of course, there weren't any that weren't very muscular. And you know, the ones that had like rays of light or magic rings, or you know, and of all the mind qualities, which could go in which direction, and which could go in the past, and which could go in the future. And he had this elaborate categorizing system to lay all of this out. And of course, he himself was a super being in disguise. And I have a whole album full of pictures of my son, in which in every picture he would be going like this, or like this, you know. And in his mind, I would ask him later on, what was this all about? How come you look completely rigid in every picture, and your little knuckles are sticking out like this? It looks like he's ready to fight, but if you watch it, he's got this knuckle sticking out like that, and it's like that. And he told me that basically at that time he was visualizing very strongly that he was this superhero that had these magic rings on these 2 fingers with rays coming out of them. And he was most certain that if he visualized it hard enough, that when the picture was taken, he would in fact be seen in that way, and that what could not be seen by the naked eye would be seen by the camera. So he was revealing his secret identity in that way, and was really disappointed when he saw the pictures. Anyway, so most children have their particular way of dealing with this, and when we think of a precious wish-fulfilling jewel or something that can fulfill all of our wishes, really, embarrassingly, some of our feelings about that are not all that different from what we thought as a child. Perhaps we're not thinking of magical wands made with glitter or rolls of aluminum foil that can be created in such a way as to be magical in its appearance, if not truly effective. And perhaps we don't think of ourselves as becoming superheroes or as having rings like that, that can zap whatever obstacles arise in our path. But we do think of having our wishes fulfilled as a very external process. First of all, we often do not understand our wishes. We think that our wishes are external things. We do not understand what will make us happy. It is in fact one of Lord Buddha's basic teachings. He teaches that one thing, one quality that all sentient beings have in common, and that we might consider our common humanity, is that all sentient beings wish to be happy. That's the one thing that we all have in common, whether we are animals, whether we are formless beings, whether we are human beings, whether we are non-physical beings, whether we are any kind of beings that we could possibly imagine. The one thing that we have in common is that we all wish to be happy. And the other thing, unfortunately, that Lord Buddha says that we have very much in common is that being sentient beings, none of us understand how to attain that happiness, that we do not understand the components of happiness. And so we think of our happiness in a very external way. We basically continue to delude ourselves, thinking that if we could just arrange our lives in a certain way, harmonize our lives somehow, make our lives more rich with experience of any kind, and generally we think we know what kind it should be. We think that if we can make our lives perhaps more prosperous, if perhaps we could just finally find one job situation in which we are completely successful, then somehow happiness will come to us. Or if we can attain some kind of extraordinary beauty, or if we can we just think, well, I've got all the components of a happy life, if only I could find the relationship. Then in finding the relationship, most certainly I would be happy, because that's what it takes, you see. And there are those with karma that is much different from us who feel that if they could just hurt enough other people, then the powerful feeling that they would feel would make them happy. Or feel that if they could just be on top more, then the people that they crunched underneath themselves would somehow make them happy. There are people whose karma, in truth, is that way, that they feel that somehow they can be selfish and they can be self-absorbed, or they can even harm others, and that somehow that feeling of power or potency will bring them happiness. And of course that is why people are driven to do certain kinds of crimes or certain kinds of truly what we consider to be abnormal things. Ultimately, they wish to be happy. But it's hard for us to see that, and yet we continue to pursue the ways in which we think we can become happy. And we have something of a magic formula in doing that. We think, if I could only manipulate my circumstances around just this way, or if I could only move this over here just a little bit, or if I could just get this, once having this, everything would be fine. Or if I could just control this event, or this circumstance, or this attitude. Of course, it's the attitude that someone else has about me. If I could just control this thing, then upon controlling this, surely I would be happy. Actually, one experiences a feeling that one mistakes for happiness when one finds some particular thing that one can do that brings temporary gratification. For instance, if we find a new boyfriend or girlfriend, husband or wife, there is a period of time during which one kind of generally floats on an even keel. One feels satisfied. One feels that the things that ordinarily bother one no longer chafe as much. That we're a little bit better greased. You know, we can go over the cracks a little bit better. We have a little bit more oil on our backs, and what befalls us tends not to bother us quite as much. But generally, that experience is short-lived. And generally, the thing that we have just gotten, like the new relationship, becomes problematic and becomes another reason for us to feel as we felt before, somehow unhappy. The temporary gratification that we feel is just that, is temporary gratification, and it is based on the belief that we have accomplished something that can make us more whole. But what remains, and what remains steadfast, is the belief in what remains unthreatened. In fact, what remains strengthened is the belief in self-nature as being inherently real, the belief in the ego state, and all of the entrapments that go with ego, which Lord Buddha teaches us, and I hope that you have come to some classes previous to this, because then you will follow this line of thinking. But this is the very thing that Lord Buddha teaches us is the true cause for unhappiness. The belief in self-nature as being inherently real, and all of the desire and exaggeration that comes from that belief. So the temporary gratification cannot be long-term. It cannot be permanent, in that it does not address the real cause of suffering, and then therefore cannot bring about the true cessation of suffering. Lord Buddha teaches us the truth of cessation. That is to say, Lord Buddha teaches us that there is a cessation to suffering. And he teaches us that this cessation of suffering comes about when one eradicates or pacifies the true causes of suffering. That is to say, that the cessation of suffering is synonymous with the cessation of desire. And that the cessation of desire actually is the same as, and comes at the same time as, the cessation of the fixation upon or the belief in self-nature as being inherently real. So, according to the Buddhist formula then, there is a cessation of suffering. One can be happy, and one can be happy in a permanent way, but one must understand the permanent happiness. The permanent happiness is the actual release from the entire realm, possibility, and potential for suffering. The permanent cessation of suffering, the permanent happiness, occurs when one actually pacifies all of the building blocks with which one constantly constructs suffering. And that's hard for us to hear, because we think, well, I'm not constructing suffering. I'm trying to be happy. You just said so. And I'm doing the best I can. I'm trying to live a good life. I'm just trying to do what I can do, and I do the best that I can. And I'm not making unhappiness. I wouldn't do that. Yet, according to the Buddha's teaching, suffering actually consists of the desire, or rather the building blocks of suffering actually consist of desire, and all of the activities that we engage in to fulfill desire, as well as all of the activities that we engage in that are a result of the exaggeration or the projection of that desire onto others, as well as all of the cause and effect relationships that have continually arisen since time out of mind, since the first conceptualization of I-ness, which did not begin with this lifetime. but is a habitual tendency that is long ingrained, and according to the Buddha, since time out of mind. So, how then are we to understand the promise that there is some way to be happy? Perhaps we have to examine for ourselves whether we still view happiness in this magic formula way. Perhaps we still view happiness in this external way. Perhaps we still think if there's just this one mystery about life that we could solve, that somehow we could get happy. Or perhaps we still view ourselves in a way that actually makes more solid the idea of ego. You see, many of us view ourselves as being extremely limited, or basically as having some internal flaw, some real flaw that we somehow were born with. Many of us think of ourselves as deeply flawed, broken somehow inside. It's a very common human experience. We think of ourselves that way perhaps because, and we think that the reason why is because we did not have total love and total support when we were children. Or that we seem to look back at the earlier part of our lives and we've seen many failures, and from that we have concluded that we are somehow deeply flawed within us. We look at other people and they seem to be able to do things easily, and we seem to hardly be able to do things at all. We consider ourselves flawed, and whether we consider that feeling in a very obvious way, whether we really think to ourselves, there's something wrong with me, or whether it's in a more subtle or hidden way, most sentient beings actually carry around that feeling of being flawed on some level. So we think that really, if we could just overcome that flaw in some way, that we would overcome that feeling of unhappiness, that somehow we would be able to fix what ails us, that somehow we would have attained the magic formula. We try then to formalize for ourselves, or to determine for ourselves what that feeling of flaw is all about. For some of us, in fact many of us, we think that the feeling of flaw comes about because there's something inside of us that never quite got loved, or that we are somehow unworthy of love. And we think that this is true in a very deep sense, that we're not capable of sustaining love, that love cannot really come to us. And so we spend the rest of our lives, literally, reaching outside, creating circumstances, manipulating circumstances in order to have some success that we think will somehow magically prove to us that in fact we can be loved, or can heal this tremendous flaw or rift that we feel inside of us. Others of us, and there are many of us that feel this way, feel that we are flawed in some way that determines our potency, our strength, our competency. It's not really unconnected with our ability to be loved, you see, but somehow we view it in a slightly different way. We feel that we have no way to be strong, that we are somehow broken, that no matter what we do, we cannot fix this lack of potency, that it's deep, and that everything in our lives shames us by demonstrating it. And we think that if we somehow can do this one thing, or this continuous string of activities, more likely in this case it is a continuous string of activities that displays our competence, that somehow we will fix this deep belief. Unfortunately, this never happens. Not ever. Not once. Not so far, and not soon. There is nothing that you can do that will create a fix-it for this internal flaw. Even if you have a string of successes that continuously display your competence to the world, you will continue to be hungry for these experiences. And in fact, often the craving for these experiences becomes more and more and more. And even if you find one magnificent love affair after another, or so many people lining up for blocks, miles maybe, simply to give you more and more approval, even if you could arrange such a thing, even if it happened naturally, trust me when I tell you, you'll think that it's a put-on. You'll find a way to have a separation between this external event and this internal flaw. You will still not feel loved. Sometimes the loneliest people of all, and the ones that feel self-worth least of all, or the ones that feel that have a great deal of approval or have a great deal of public awareness or somehow are loved by millions of people, perhaps actors or actresses or people that are famous. So it really does not connect. What then is the magic formula? What can one accomplish? What can one do to bring about this healing? And ultimately it is the true healing. There is no more profound healing than this. According to the Buddha, this ultimate healing takes place only when one truly achieves enlightenment. According to the Buddha, neuroses actually began at the same time that the idea, the concept of self-nature actually began. Because at that moment, one began to act inappropriately to one's true nature. One developed a sense of compulsion or fixation that is wrapped around the idea of self, because self does not exist if one does not continue to redefine it, if one does not continue to gather conceptualization, as well as to engage in the exaggerations that continually come from these concepts. If one does not continually reinforce, if one does not create the continuum of self-nature as one understands it, the game simply falls apart, you see, because the true nature remains and is steadfast and cannot be changed. The primordial wisdom state, that state of pure luminosity, free of such conceptualization, that state remains and is unchanged, is undiminished, uncompromised. So that if one does not continue with the artificial construction of self as it is understood, the mind simply relaxes into realizing the primordial wisdom state. But we continue that continuum. We continue to define self-nature. We continue to exaggerate self-nature. We continue to be involved in the karmic cause and effect relationships that came about because of our considering self-nature to be inherently real and doing so since time out of mind, to the point that now it has become a compulsion, a strong habitual tendency, a tendency that cannot merely be overcome by saying, I'm not going to do this anymore. Because hearing what the Buddha says, doesn't it sound like the best thing you can do is just stop? Doesn't it sound like the best thing to do is just relax your mind and don't think about self anymore and stop making ideas about self and stop defining self and stop being compulsive about it? Well, try it. You can't do it. And you can't do it because the habitual tendency, the compulsion to do so, is so strong due to the reality, due to the perceived reality of the continuum of self, and due to the cause and effect relationships that have built up, the karma that has built up since time out of mind. So we have to determine for ourselves then some method or some way. Now, when we look at the great Bodhisattva Chenrezig, we look that in his hand he is holding a crystal mala. A mala is used to engage in practice. It is used to count one's mantras and one's prayers. The holding of the mala in the hand of Chenrezig is symbolic of the path. It is symbolic of method that will bring about the cessation of suffering. It is not a coincidence that the mala is crystal. This crystal mala indicates the clarity of perception, the clarity of the pure perception of one's own primordial nature, the clarity of one's mind that will occur through the practice of that Chenrezig is doing, through the practice of Dharma. And of course, on the other hand, Chenrezig holds the lotus. The lotus is a symbol that is greatly used in Vajrayana, in Buddhism in general, actually, particularly in Vajrayana, because if you understand how a lotus grows, the roots, a lotus will grow in a pond, and it can grow in a pond that is extremely slimy, and it can make that pond look quite beautiful. And the way that the lotus grows is that the roots of the lotus grow in the slime and the sediment of the pond, which is filled with microorganisms and goo and kind of mush and all kinds of slimy stuff. And the stem of the lotus comes up through the water, and the flower of the lotus actually appears above the water, and that's the only part that we see. We see the pure lotus flower, and it is extremely beautiful. It is extremely pure, and you would not guess that the lotus has arisen from the slime of the mud of the pond, in the same way that the mind of enlightenment is extremely pure, is extremely luminous, and one would never guess that it had arisen from the slime of the 6 realms of cyclic existence. So now we should look then at this precious wish-fulfilling jewel. The path is held, it seems to be the method. But what is the jewel? What is that which brings about what we wish? First, let's define what we wish. According to the Buddha, all sentient beings wish the cessation of suffering. We might particularly think we wish for a new car, or wish for more money, or wish for more youth, or wish for more beauty, or wish for even such altruistic goals as the world to experience no more war, and certainly we all wish for that. Yet if we understand what that wish is, we must understand the basis for any of those wishes, even including the car, even including the prosperity, even including the youth and beauty, even including the end of war. The basis for all of these wishes is the cessation of all suffering, or the mind of pure awareness. Remember that any suffering we experience, according to the Buddha, is actually constructed with the same building blocks that are used to construct the belief in self-nature as being inherently real. Even war, even the phenomena known as war, cannot be experienced, cannot be constructed, if one does not have the fixation upon, or the compulsion to enforce the belief in self-nature as being inherently real. One cannot fight with anyone else if one were not constantly concentrating on the belief in self-nature as being inherently real, and the need to define oneself. That's what a fight is. It's an active way of defining oneself and one's property and one's rights and one's particular feud. Not only that, but the actual ingredients that make up a fight, that make up an argument, that make up a war, they all fall apart if one is not concentrating on the belief in self-nature as being inherently real, or is not fixated rather on that. In that, the reasons are considered to be something like an artificial extension of the construction of self-nature. When we engage in activity that brings about suffering, we do so because we are trying to consider for ourselves or not trying to consider for ourselves, but are trying to accomplish for ourselves ways for ourselves to be happy. We do not understand that we are contributing to more suffering. We try to do things that will give us what we need. And yet, in doing that, we continue to construct more and more reasons to suffer. According to the Buddha, for instance, a person might think, I want to be happy and relaxed right now. So what I'll do to be happy and relaxed right now is I'll get into something comfortable, I'll sit in front of the TV, I'll have something nice to drink, I'll be with my family, I'll try to be as relaxed as possible, or I'll go to a movie, or I'll do something that I consider real fun, and I'll have this time for me. Well, there's nothing wrong in doing any of that. Yet, according to the Buddha, the very karma that is created by self-absorption, the very karma that reinforces the idea of I'm doing this for me, the very karma that causes us to take for ourselves something that might produce happiness, actually increases the fixation on self-nature, actually increases the karma associated with deprivation and unhappiness. There's nothing wrong with doing any of that. I myself do that. Yet, and I know that all of the great lamas that have ever come to our center watch TV and relax. So that isn't the point that I'm trying to make. The point that I'm trying to make is that according to the Buddha, in order to rid one's mind of the compulsion associated with suffering, in order to rid one's mind of the makeup of suffering, one actually must accomplish the antidote to suffering, which is not more concentration on the reality of self-nature, but instead is actually participation in activities that are selfless. According to the Buddha, the way to pacify the suffering of loneliness, in order to pacify the suffering of the feeling of being unloved, in order to pacify even the suffering of poverty, one must actually engage in the antidote, which is selfless activity, which is the meditation on the emptiness of self-nature as well as the emptiness of all phenomena, which is to participate in activity that is of benefit to sentient beings, which is the end of self-absorption. The end of self-absorption is the antidote, actually, for the sufferings associated with self. So, one might then consider it to be wise to work in a steadfast way to engage in meritorious or virtuous or loving activity in this lifetime. One might engage in generosity. One might engage in activity that is of benefit to sentient beings. One might meditate then on the true nature, the primordial wisdom state, that state of clear luminosity. And in doing that, one would certainly pacify the causes for suffering in this time and also in some future time. Then, according to the Buddha's teaching, the wish-fulfilling jewel that the Bodhisattva Chenrezig holds is actually the very mind of enlightenment, the very mind of precious awakening. That state of non-duality, that state of pure cognition, that state that is pure awakening to the nature, that suchness, which is the intrinsic nature of self and of all phenomena. According to the Buddha's teaching, the wish-fulfilling gem is the awakened mind. The wish-fulfilling gem is the mind that perceives the nature which is clear, luminous, spontaneously arisen, and miraculously complete, unchanging, undiminished, pure and uncompromised. That nature which is pure cognition, which is called innately wakeful in that it is not a dead and unknowing state of darkness or emptiness or voidness in that way, but rather the pure cognition of luminosity. We experience cognition that is specific. We know what we know, and think because of that we are stunningly awake and amazingly competent. But in fact, in the state of pure cognition, the awareness is non-specific. It is undiminished by subject and object. It is unconfined by distance and form. It is therefore unlimited, and compares to our present state of awareness, much in the same way as a singular candle on a birthday cake would compare to 1,000,000 suns. The light, of course, is different. In this state of pure awakening, one perceives the true nature and no longer engages in the perception that occurs based on the erroneous presupposition of self-nature as being inherently real. One engages in pure cognition, that is, cognition which is free of the belief in self. It is not subject and object oriented. It therefore does not have the material, does not have the building blocks, the cause and effect relationships, and all of the exaggerations that occur due to the process of conceptualization that are necessary to construct the perception of suffering. Nor, in that state of precious awakening, can the cause and effect relationship known as karma exist. There is no subject, there is no object, there is no deed, there is no doer of the deed. There is no victim, there is no attacker. There is no separation. That mind is the mind of pure cognition, pure luminosity. And it is the mind of the Buddha. It is the mind that is our inherent nature. And so we generate ourselves as the Bodhisattva Chenrezig in order to accomplish that awareness of our nature. Each of us, according to the Buddha's teachings, are inherently Buddhas. The nature that is the awakened Buddha nature, that is that awakened state, is already accomplished. You're not making it now by being spiritual, you see. You're not constructing it. You're not collecting it. It isn't the kind of thing that you'll have as soon as the basket is full. You're not getting it by living a good life. That nature is already accomplished. It is already fully developed. It cannot get any bigger or any nearer. It cannot get brighter. It is spontaneously complete. However, we do not perceive that nature due to our fixation on the compulsions associated with self, with the belief in self. We do not have spaciousness. We do not have space in our minds during which the mind, in its normal, relaxed state, can experience all phenomena as being spontaneously arisen and instantaneously liberated. We cannot perceive that. We remain fixated because of the fixation on self-nature as being inherently real. However, it is possible through one's practice, and of course this is the point of practice, to begin to generate one's mind in a pure deity form, the form that is consistent with the manifestation and the demonstration given by the Bodhisattva Chenrezig. It is possible to generate one's mind in such a pure form that it becomes like the wish-fulfilling jewel, and is then of benefit to other sentient beings. When one generates oneself as the deity Chenrezig, or any deity, but actually in this case Chenrezig, one takes a moment before the original generation to meditate on what is called shunyata, or the meditation on empty nature. One lets actually one's conceptualization fall. One relaxes the mind. And of course this takes some practice. It's not something that we would do easily the first time we do it. But here we are filled with conceptualization. We perceive table, which is this separate from self. We perceive chair, which holds up self. We perceive space and time, and all of these are conceptual experiences that are relative to the perception of self. We do not negate them. We do not say, oh, everything's really empty, therefore I'm going to visualize it not being here. We simply allow the mind to relax. And the process of conceptualization is allowed to relax also. And you do not look for yourself to see if you are being successful at this, because the moment you look to see if you're being successful, at that moment you are no longer meditating on shunyata. So you simply relax the mind. And generally in puja, that mental relaxation is just instant. It is a mistake actually to let that mental relaxation go for too long, because the mind will begin to gather concept again almost instantaneously. The goal is to allow the concept to let go and allow the mind to relax, and then instantaneously, as thought begins to form again, arise as the deity. And one arises as the deity in different ways according to the puja. This is a very condensed and brief practice. In this practice, it is considered that one instantly arises as Chenrezig sitting on a lotus and moon seat. In other practices, perhaps the seed syllable of the deity will arise first, or perhaps the lotus and moon seat will arise first. There are many different varieties, as there are many different terma revelations. But in this particular practice, one arises in this form instantaneously, and it is considered that already the moon and the lotus and moon seat are established. But what is the inner posture that one takes? One has meditated on shunyata. One has relaxed one's mind. Then instantaneously one arises as the deity. That means that as thought begins to reform, as one begins to renegotiate conceptualization, and that will happen instantaneously, one utilizes this opportunity, does not negate it, but utilizes this opportunity to consider that this form arises directly from the experience of shunyata, directly from the experience of emptiness, and therefore is pure in the way that we, as we perceive ourselves and all of the phenomena of our lives, arise directly from the experience of self. Instead, with this this demonstration or this manifestation or this display arises directly from the experience of shunyata. And so arising directly from the experience of shunyata, it is a pure form. It displays instead of the qualities of ordinary sentient beings such as self-absorption, old age, sickness and death, selfishness, problems, all the things that we carry around with us, relative view, all of these things. Instead of displaying these qualities, it displays the pure qualities which are consistent in the experience of shunyata. The pure qualities such as are demonstrated by the particular deity, in this case Chenrezig. One's mind arises as the pure, wish-fulfilling gem. One's mind arises consistent with awakening, luminous, pure, uncontrived. Consistent with the awakened state, the mind or self-nature is experienced as essentially empty. One's mind arises in a form that is the precious awakening, and that is the actual means by which one accomplishes all wishes. So it is considered that one's mind arises in that pure form consistent with shunyata. One's mind arises in a form that has as its quality as well the discipline of practice, the ability to practice, and the result of practice, demonstrated by Chenrezig's holding the crystal mala. One's mind arises in the form that arises in luminous purity from the 6 realms of cyclic existence, victorious, as does the lotus, which is held in the left hand. One arises with the empowerment and the qualities of all the 5 Buddha families, as demonstrated by the crown. One has the complete empowerment of the 3 kayas, or 3 bodies of the Buddha, the Dharmakaya, Sambhogakaya, and Nirmanakaya forms, which even if you don't know what they are, one can consider that one has accomplished all the realms of precious awakening, all the potentials and potencies of precious awakening. One arises in a peaceful form, and one generates activity that is of benefit to sentient beings, as indicated by the mantra encircling in a clockwise direction around the seed syllable, which is seated upon the heart, the lotus throne of the heart. So one considers that one actually arises in this pure form, whereas previously in one's ordinary state, one arises as a sentient being with all of the phenomena and stuff that we have. Because of the foundational belief in self-nature, one now arises in this pure form because of the experience of shunyata. And that is the true nature. Are you pretending that you're Chenrezig? No, because shunyata is the true experience. Because this nature is the true nature. And as you do the practice, as you chant the practice, you visualize, and as you visualize, you recite mantra periodically throughout the practice, and then at the end of the practice, for some length of time, and the recitation of the mantra, along with the generation of oneself as the deity, actually brings about the purification of the perception that causes you to compulsively fixate on the reality of ego, on the belief in self-nature as being inherently real. Actually, this particular practice is a practice in which Chenrezig arrives in 6 different forms. The meaning of that is that, according to the Buddha's teachings, there are 6 realms of cyclic existence, any of which we could be born in. There are lower realms and higher realms, and according to the karma of our mind, according to the fabric of our mind, we will incarnate in one of the 6 realms. We have incarnated in the realm of, in the human realm, and it takes a certain karma to be incarnated in the human realm. Each of the 6 realms of cyclic existence, they are non-physical and physical, and actually they require a certain karma and a certain impure karma within the mind stream in order to incarnate in these realms. So you are purifying the karma associated with being incarnated in these realms and generating the merit by which to achieve pure enlightenment. By visualizing oneself as the deity upon the lotus and moon seat, one is purifying the karma of birth, because in that experience the deity actually takes birth on the pure experience of the lotus and moon seat, whereas we seem to have the karma of taking birth in ordinary ways that are associated with whatever realm we are in, such as the ordinary human way is to be born from a female human. The ordinary animal way is to be born from a female animal or from an egg. There are other realms in which the ordinary way is to be born from extreme heat or extreme cold or moisture. There are different kinds of experiences associated with different realms. In this practice, you purify the birth so that one is reborn in a pure way, experiencing spontaneously the liberation of all phenomena, experiencing spontaneously self-nature as being inherently real. Self-nature as being inherently empty. And in this way, pure experience is born, and the birth is a miraculous birth rather than an ordinary birth, consisting of substance. One purifies one's experience of phenomena by generating oneself as the pure mind form. One purifies one's karma by generating one's mind as the precious wish-fulfilling jewel. One purifies one's experience and karma and perception as well by generating the miraculous and compassionate activity of the light rays extending from the mala, extending from the mantra recitation, going to all sentient beings. So then, by the compassionate activity associated with Chenrezig, one actually experiences the purification of one's own karma due to this compassionate activity. So briefly, these are some of the postures that one should assume, some of the attitudes that one should take upon doing this very short and concise practice. It is a practice that is just a few pages long. Once understood, it is a practice that can be done quite easily, and it is a practice that is extremely beneficial. Nanda.